All right. Hey, everybody. We have a small but mighty crew tonight. But we have some really great conversations to be had as we continue throughout the evening. So I made a mistake earlier and I said Patrick and Andrew. I meant to say Patrick and Stuart are joining us. But you said you get that a lot. Okay. So I first encountered your work and you through a conversation that I was encouraged to have by Nick Sly, where we met at Old Country Road Coffee Shop. And there was a series of questions about both No Dream Deferred. And at the time, we were in the process of envisioning the André Cailloux Center. And then you were able to experience the 2023 festival, which was great. And I've learned since then that there have been so many conversations with artists and institutions and organizations, both artistic and also even with the city of New Orleans, about this understanding of performing New Orleans and reconsidering resilience and what it means. And so there are all types of responses to your work and your research, and it's really interesting to me. Having met you and had these conversations, some of what those responses have been, knowing that this has been years of coming to New Orleans and conversations and relationships at this point that have been built. And so I really am envisioning this as an opportunity for us to go through some of your findings, hear from you directly, and then because that data and that research really belongs to the city, having an open conversation with you all about what else is still needed and also where do we go from here. And in the second panel conversation, we're talking with some of the folks who are featured in your book, and we're also talking to folks who are part of that larger conversation. And really digging into the next phase of place work, memory work, co-design here in New Orleans, justice work, and the arts. So without further ado, I would love to have you introduce yourself to everyone, and then we can get into some of your experiences and some of your work that you've been doing over these past, what has it been, like 7 years here in New Orleans. All right.
I mean, first of all, thank you so much for the generous invitation to be here. It's a real privilege, and a real privilege to be in this building. It's such a wonderful place in the city. I'm Patrick Duggan. I'm a British academic in performance studies, so I'm interested in the way performance affords us means of looking at the world around us, from theatre practice that happens in buildings like this all the way through to performances that we might not understand as performance, so things that happen in the street and things that happen in meetings and systems, and how we understand that and what it teaches us about the world. I'm based at Northumbria University in the UK, right at the very, very top of England, just before it becomes Scotland. And I'm a bit sad that it's not actually Scotland, but other than that, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Stuart Andrews. I'm very similar to Patrick really. I work in performance studies. I'm very interested in place and how artists make sense of place. I think that's a really important element of arts practice. I work at Brunel, University of London. Brunel is effectively Heathrow if you've been to the UK. It is the very, very edge of London, so it's kind of on the edge. And so I've been there for about 5 years. We've been running the project since 2017, but we've been in conversations before that, and we just had this sense that our interests were interconnecting, and so it's been lovely working on a project that is fully dialogic. We do as much of this work together, travel together to the city, and spend time in conversation with ourselves and with the city. And it's the first time I've worked collaboratively before, but never in this kind of sustained way, so that's been a really nice element of this work.
All right, so let me jump right in. So I don't think it would be too egregious to say that you are both white and you're not from here. And what brought you to New Orleans? What made you think this is where we need to go for this work, for this project. And how are you thinking about entering community and working and being in dialogue with folks who are here?
So yeah, we're both white, middle-aged men from another country that's 5,000 miles away. That presents a really meaningful problem. And we acknowledge that in all the work that we do at all times. And I think it's really important to say, in a sense, that what we're talking about in this bit of this event is from an outsider's perspective. And we're trying to do work in as ethical a way as we can, and to be in ongoing conversation with people in this place, and to share our work as it emerges in an ongoing way that acknowledges our positionality. So that's where I would start. What led us to New Orleans, I think, is a more complex conversation, because we were doing some of this work before we came here together. What got me to New Orleans the first time was that I was a tourist. I came in 2013 to visit a friend who had visited from New Orleans, and I was here for 3.5 days, and I did all the things that you do in 3.5 days that's in a tourist agenda. And I left, and I had had a really lovely time, but I didn't really feel like I'd understood anything. I just had a predetermined journey through the city. And that, I suppose, sparked a desire to come back. And I came back in 2016 to go to a conference. The conference was awful, so I left the conference, and I walked around and spent time being here in an unguided way and being here without really thinking about work. And it was through that experience that I became more aware that New Orleans is a city of performance in multiple different ways. It exists through lots of different forms of performance, from the culinary arts through to work that happens in this space, through to an enormous street culture of performance. And as a scholar of performance, as someone who is interested in the importance of performance forms to understandings of place, I became fascinated by the idea of New Orleans. And that's why I wanted to learn more about it. It didn't really start as a desire to come and write a book. It didn't really come as a desire to come and do anything in the city. It started as a sense of curiosity, a sense that this was a vibrant place to be a performance studies scholar. And so when we came in 2018, we came on a hunch that there were interesting things to think about in this space that is about thinking about the strategic position of arts in a city and how a city functions. And we came and we began conversations, and when we left from that trip, we realized that if we were to do anything with the experience of having been here, we had to come back. And we had to come back again and again and again, because we are non-experts. And we have written a book which oftentimes academics will claim makes them an expert. We're not. We've written a thing that has some ideas in it. We hope those ideas end up being useful, but as you said, Lauren, and I think this is a really good point, it's not ours anymore. So we've done some thinking, we've put some words in a page, we hope that they are useful and valuable in some way, but they're not ours once they're out in the world. And so it's for others to determine what to do with that, and if that is helpful and valuable. And what experiences have we had? Well, we've messed up quite a lot, I think. We did an event in 2019 that was in a room that we didn't have any control over in terms of what it felt like to be in that room. And so we were positioned at the front of the room with a microphone that didn't work, and we started badly, and we messed it up. And it was a real learning experience, and it was a lot of very generous feedback. And as recently as this week, we've been given feedback about our thinking and about the work that has changed what we're doing with bits of the book, and how that informs how we think and how we act. So it's a process of being in conversation and taking seriously the feedback loop that people in this city have been generous enough to offer us. How's that as a starting point?
No, I mean, I think that's it. Yeah, I think one of the other things I might add is that our work takes a case study focus. So we're not in any way trying to survey or understand the whole city, because certainly as outsiders, I think that would be an impossible thing. And that suggests that a city is going to stay the same when every day is a different day. So by what we try and do is identify some very specific details and go, what's interesting about this? There's something here, and then be in dialogue with people who are involved in that particular practice, and then try and do some thinking, and then share that thinking. So, although we've produced a book which in a way sits uneasily with us, I think it's probably easier to see it as a series of things that we've looked at and perspectives we had, and we're hoping the perspectives will be useful. And it just is that it comes together as a particular book, but it's the ideas in isolation, I think, that are quite exciting.
Right. So before we start to look at some of the things that, some of the experiences and stories and conversations that you have had over the years, I just want to name that there's all types of responses to this word resilience. And can you say the subtitle of the book?
Yes, I think so. It's performing New Orleans, rethinking resilience in art and everyday life.
Okay. And I know that there are different responses. I know people in this room probably have a different context for how they look at resilience. And I shared this with you all, but for me personally, I don't place a value on resilience versus transformation. I tend to a lot of times be a person who is rooted in transformation. So like I think of resilience as knockdown, come back up, knock down, come back up, come back to beginning, come back to status quo. I tend to get knocked down, come up, and I'm like, all of this got to go. Whatever just knocked me down, it's all got to change. It's all got to be different. But that's not to say that resilience doesn't have its benefits, and it's definitely a key to survival. So I'm a person who tends not to attach a value to or value over of transformation over resilience. And I understand that different people have different work to do. So, but are there any things that insights into how you all were thinking about resilience, or how the people that you were in conversation with were thinking about resilience, or what is the context of the word as it relates to your work?
I think it's all got to change is a really strong way of approaching it. I think our project started in the UK, and we were interested how resilience was operating there, and it was those conversations that were kind of ongoing when you went to New Orleans, and then we had a conversation about it and went, okay, there's some interesting stuff here. And throughout this project, we're acutely aware that resilience has been used in really problematic, there are other words, but there might be children, in really difficult ways in this city. And that has changed our understanding of the term. It means we don't use it with the lightness that academics might ordinarily use terms, because it remains an extremely difficult term. But in a way, rather than, we could come at it from resilience and how we define resilience and those kind of things, but actually what we're interested in our research is how artists are doing really exciting, interesting, novel projects exploring critical challenges facing a city. So actually that work doesn't need to touch resilience as a concept. It's just artists are thinking things through in powerful, important ways. Where's the writing on that? And how can we put some of those practices together when we think about a place? And again, we're not suggesting that we're surveying all the practice that's happening in the city that's relevant to those topics, but there are artists doing incredibly important things. And we started talking to people in resilience, people in emergency planning here, also in the UK. And particularly in the UK, we'd have these conversations and we'd say, so have you thought about engaging with arts and culture in your work? And they were like, we know arts and culture are really important. We just don't know how to engage. And we were interested by that interest in arts and culture, and kind of went, well, if there was something where we could articulate what's really exciting about arts practice and the ways in which it is addressing critical challenges in places, then it feels like some of that knowledge might be useful. And there's a risk there, because that looks like we are speaking for artists, and that's not ideal either. So we tried to develop methodologies and workshop approaches where we could speak with artists and find out what their work was doing and find out what their interests were. Speak with emergency planners and find out what the challenges they were facing, and try and find aspects of connection that might lead to productive conversation. And then maybe we allow people to talk together. But it's been a journey of multiple conversations. It's something we're particularly careful about. How am I doing?
I would just add to that the sense of your definition about resilience, about that idea of being knocked down and getting back up, and being knocked down and getting back up, is where resilience theory began. Right? It began with this idea of
finding systems and processes that allow you to return to the before, to bounce back is the awful phrase that is in a lot of resilience theory. Part of the work came for us from an annoyance with that idea, from an annoyance with the idea that you go through something and the idea is you go backwards as a result of that. So we're trying to look at how you transform, how you move forwards through those things. So it's really complicated work, but we're trying.
Right, so let's get into it. JC, are you up there? Can we go to the first slide so we can talk a little bit about y'all's work?
Okay. Sorry, that was loud. I don't know why I did that. There we go. I think I was worried about whether you could see. Am I in your way? Or are you okay? It's okay, great. Okay, so we don't really like slides with lots of words, but it seemed useful to put some things out there. So our research focus and our process, we investigate how art practices and processes, art organisations and performances of place do certain things. And this is about our argument about performance. Performance, we suggest, does something. It enacts something. It makes something happen in terms of meaning in the world. So our senses, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is for a slide for today, it's some of the things that the arts do and performances do. They constitute critical strategic voices in a place. And I think while in the arts that may not seem a surprise, actually in other disciplines it may be less widely known, so that seems important. They give voice to communities, to cultures, to memories. They enact creative processes of problem solving, they develop novel means of addressing city challenges, and they refocus public debates through their practice. And here we're not saying that the job of the arts, or any job of the arts, is to address city challenges. It's just that artists have done awesome work that does begin to speak powerfully to particular challenges, so we're interested in looking at that. So we work through a series of processes. It's very iterative. Our process evolves and changes and develops as we have conversations with people. They impact on our thinking, and we try and shift to attend to that. So it's iterative, and it's a process of being in conversation. It's a performance analysis of case studies, and again, rather than a survey, it's looking at details. It's an embodied experience of place. So in our analysis, we're particularly concerned about how it feels to sit on the stage, how it feels to be in an audience, how it feels to wander in a park and listen to stories of the place in the past that are different to the place you're seeing. It's a lot of ongoing, sometimes rather dull desk-based research. It's about reading publications, literature reviews of books and sources on performance and on the arts, on New Orleans, on resilience theory, on resilience practice and policy, those kind of things, and a bunch of other areas. It's horizon scanning, looking for interesting shows, looking for new ideas, looking for where conversations are happening, online meetings, interviews, and then sharing emerging thinking, findings, and data. And this does not sit easily in our souls in a way as academics, because the job was you're supposed to do a load of thinking and then write something, and then you talk about it. And we've tried to really rebel against that. And so we share things in blogs, we write in magazines, we write in resilience journals, we do publish academic articles, but we try as we can to make them open access so they're free to use. It's that kind of thing. So we're trying to write for a number of different audiences when we're sharing that.
Some of the groups that you all talk to, or are these just pictures?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Do you want to talk through these?
I can do. Yeah. So these are actually the three that are here are sort of smaller case study. Well, no, Sleeves Up Nola is a big case study about the way in which cultural practices of New Orleans were in conversation with the particular context of the pandemic as a means of encouraging communities across the city to get a shop so that they could get back to these cultural practices. And the argument that we're making is that the cultural practices themselves, although put together and deployed in a new way that has a particular message around the pandemic, the heart of the cultural practice that's being depicted is not changing. So you're not asking people to do things that are outside of their practice, their cultural and artistic practice. You're putting a frame around that so that the performance that is made is engaged with what it means to get back to the city during the pandemic. So that's quite a kind of big case study in the book. The picture at the bottom is outside Accra. It was brass on the boulevard, and again we talk about what was that event like to be at, and what was it saying about what being in New Orleans is like, and what Accra is doing in that space as well. And the swings are there because I think we like the swings, because it's a nice place to sit and relax and be in the city in a way. So it's a combination of, the swings is just a picture, but the other two are case studies in the book and things that we engage with and talk about. And we were at this Brass on the Boulevard because we'd gone to meet some people at Accra, and we saw an exhibition there called Art of the Black Experience, and we had a conversation with Sonny Patterson at that, and that was a really generous learning experience, and we were told about Brass at the Boulevard, and they said come and see it, and so we did.
Great. Should we move to the next slide?
We can move on.
Okay, we can move to the next slide.
Well, speaking of Accra, one of the things that we wanted, in a sense, to point towards is that the reason that we want to write about art and artists is because art and artists and cultural practice is powerful. And I think that Asali's quote here sums that up in a really meaningful way. And that's not just about New Orleans. So it's important here, it matters here, it does good work here. But this point about trust and the way in which artists and arts organizations are trusted in places is global. And we did work in the UK during the pandemic that bore that out as well. And so I think it's important that we understand that cultural production and means of making art in the world change things. They do things to people in the world. And because arts organizations are very often closely engaged with their audiences, in conversation with them, responding to their needs and their desires, they become trusted means of conversation and communication. And I think that that's just really worth flagging, because if we don't take account of that through academic work, where does it go? What does it do? And who is taking account of it and how? And I think that this is a really important quote that is about New Orleans, but is also a kind of global message and a rallying cry for the importance of art in the world.
Ashe. All right, ready for the next one?
Sure.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Okay. There's a lot of words here.
Thanks. Okay, so in the book Not Being Ours, in talking about this session, in thinking about how we might get across something of the book, we're sad the book's not out for this session. It'll be out later in the year, in September, pre-order from April. There's a discount code on our website. If you probably can't get to the QR code, but if you catch us later, we can tell you about it. So we begin. I'm going to go very briefly and very quickly, because otherwise we will never leave this place. It's a nice place, but we will never leave this talk. So a senior arts leader said to us one stage when we talked about the work, they said, come back often. And we loved that, because it was a really nice, people have often given us little nudges, and that one was great, because it's like the city's changing and you need to be engaged. If you're genuinely doing this, white outsider folk, then you need to come back and you need to see what's going on. So we valued that, and that is our start to the introduction, where we situate ourselves in the work and reflect on that. And then we take a series of different aspects of kind of issues in the city and think about how artists are doing great stuff to engage with them. Initially we look at over-tourism, which was a critical issue in the city in pre-pandemic, and then numbers of tourists are rising and they go to a tiny part of the city and they can only come for a certain amount of time. And so that frames the city and defines the city in a way that certainly we have some questions about. So we ask how arts organisations and performance thinking can help rethink tourist narratives and reductive conceptions of New Orleans. And here we argue a lot that performance thinking is really important, thinking about what happens when performance does something, what happens on stage, what happens in everyday environment, what happens in practices that are somewhere between everyday and artistic practice. All those things are doing something. What's the thinking that's going on, and how is that work meaningfully contributing to understandings of the city. So how are artists helping us understand how tourism might be reimagined in the city? And then maybe we should act on that. And then who would do the acting on it? Let's have a conversation about that. In playing in the streets, something people tell us a lot is that we dance in the streets here. And that seems to be a critical aspect of the place, and has been a lovely thing to think about in terms of performance. Streets and street performances act as connective tissue, we suggest, between critical parts of places, offering means of important connection between people, places and communities in playful and creative ways. And it would be too easy to undermine stuff that happens in the streets, that happens outside conventional venues, because too often there's a value placed on things that happen in venues, and that devalues the importance of everyday life, where people meet, where they gather, where conversations happen. And so we think it's really powerful and important that performance on the street politically happens on the street. It's a different kind of event than would happen in a building. In chapter 3, we look at the art and performance of what we're terming situation rooms. And here we were drawn to the fact that New Orleans has 3 situation rooms used by City Hall. And in those spaces, information comes into the space, people make decisions based on that information, and then actions are taken that result in real change in the world. And we went, well, what happens if we understood art centres in those ways, where people come together, knowledge is presented through performances, through gallery exhibitions, discussions happen, decisions may be taken, and then stuff goes on with the communities who have gathered in those art centres. So actually, if we thought about art centres as situation rooms and as key sites, for instance, in a crisis, but also in daily life, in managing housing, race inequity, economic inequity, if art centres become significant sites for attending, or if we recognise that art centres are significant, then that changes how society broadly might value those spaces. So we suggest that art spaces rehearse, analyse, and feedback situational awareness about a place to the communities of it. In this way, arts venues operate as critical strategic situation rooms for attending to, understanding, and managing how we live in a place. And this place is pretty much the site that made us go, there's something really important happening here. And your discussion of what this festival is doing and the conversations that are happening, the people you're bringing in, for us is kind of emblematic of that. And it's quite exciting to be sitting here reflecting on what was an idea that emerged from this place. Living with water, I mean, all of this, we say these words with care. It's too easy for us as outsiders to say the phrase living with water. And actually somebody said that to her once. They said, you can't understand living with water until you've cleaned a house that's been affected by water damage. And I'm sure there are other things that we would need to experience to fully begin to talk about it. But there are artists and cultural practices of water in the city that are fascinating in terms of rethinking how we might attend to water management in the city. And they offer critical means of revealing local understandings of water challenges and changing understandings over time. And that there is real value in taking heed and taking account of those changes. And then in chapter 5, pandemic performances, we very much hope we don't have to revisit this chapter through future pandemics, but it has revealed certain things about performance that we think are important. Arts practice, we suggest, offers means of refamiliarization with places after lockdowns, inviting people to re-engage with places as they have been changed. One of the key things in resilience literature is the resilience cycle, mitigation, preparation, and response and recovery. And one of the hard things for emergency planners to identify is when you move from response to a crisis to recovery from a crisis. And all of these are awful words, and but they are the words that are used. If we take seriously the arts speak powerfully about critical issues, then the way in which artists talk about those issues might help a community, might help a city understand that journey of moving from response to recovery. And that is an abstract argument that becomes much more complex when we talk about individual situations. But if a critical challenge for emergency managers could be addressed by productive conversation with artists, maybe there's something interesting there. And then in the last chapter, we look at connections. We've seen these as isolated issues, but actually we're trying to kind of say a city is complex and rich and dynamic, and all of these things are somehow in play. So how can we bring those together in conversation? Sorry, it was a very long slide.
It's fine. I think I'm getting a wind down notice, but go ahead. No,
it's fine. I think we're getting the signal. It's time.
Okay.
But so did you want to move us on to the
I was just gonna say one of the things that I particularly enjoy, and I've been able to read the research in the book, and I've been able to see the conversations that you were having with artists and organizations all over the city. And what I'm enamored by is of what it can offer, this larger argument of the role of the arts in civic co-design. Not just here, but in general, because this is something that I've always felt is often an overlooked connection. And so I love that there is a collection of data, of research that is positioning folks to think differently about the way that arts, organizations, and institutions can function and their value in civic life. So before we go any further, I want to, once again, in this understanding of what it means to create equitable data, right, and data systems, the first tenet of that is that this work that you all have done, whereas I'm not saying the book doesn't belong to you. I'm saying that the research belongs to New Orleans because it is New Orleans information. It's data points. And so in offering this back to community and back to New Orleans, thinking about from an audience perspective, what are some of the ways that this could be used? What still needs to be tapped into in terms of what do artists and organizations and community members need research on so that we can continue to push forward? And also what questions might exist from you all that can be answered? Maybe one or two questions if we can. Thank you, Josh. Josh is doing all of our ASL interpretation. Let's give it up for Josh. Did you sign what I said? Okay. Over tourism. Okay, the question about over tourism. Is that a outsider perspective of over tourism? Do you feel like that is an outsider perspective?
That's a good question. Over tourism is a formally defined theoretical term from tourism studies, which looks at how a city, this is like, forgive trying to be technical, it's the definition of it is when a place exceeds what they call its carrying capacity, and that can be a given area of a city or it can be a city as a whole, and it refers to the point at which tourism ceases to be in general only beneficial and starts to erode quality of life for the people that live there. And there is a lot of data from inside the city written about over-tourism. And so we were trying to engage with the concept of over-tourism and means of thinking through how predominant representations of the city and narratives of what New Orleans is, including come for 3.5 days, go to the quarter, get drunk, have a party, how those things can be diversified in lots of different ways through practices that are already here, but aren't part of the dominant narrative of what the city is. So thinking about how can you be a good tourist? So what are the practices that can emerge about coming to a place and taking account of other things than the to-do list? And what are the means of being in a place that try not to stress it, whilst acknowledging that for New Orleans and places like it, tourism is a really vital economic aspect of how the city works and functions.
Were there any other questions? What was it? Oh, we have one more? Okay, you go. Can you bring it? Josh, can you hear me now? I'm sorry. All righty. Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. From the playwright. Okay. Art space as situation room, as a means to move from response to recovery, but arts as a necessity for many is about getting different emotions, experiences out more so than answers. So how do we evolve the process? What does it become?
I think it's a really interesting question because there's a risk that one goes, this is a great idea. We should consciously turn art centres into situation rooms because they're doing lots of this work already. Ashe talked about how they use their foyer to get people to fill in FEMA forms after Katrina. It seems an awesome idea. Let's do more of that. And then one changes arts centres into situation rooms, and then they're no longer quite what they were. So I think it's probably about being in conversation with individual art centres about how they operate, about what could be easier in the things that they want to do that would support their communities, about how might knowledge be shared between situation rooms. So one of the things that we look towards the end of the chapter is going, well, okay, if it works as an idea to have situation rooms, then what happens if you network them together? Are they more powerful? Who is being missed out? Where are the areas in the city that don't have an art centre? Can we map all the kind of some kind of sense of centres? Who might not ever go to one, and why don't they go? And so we can ask questions like that. Also, put solar panels on the roof. Make sure they are rock solid in crisis situations, so that people can go and charge their phones, and there's warmth, and somehow that we're managing getting food to art centres. So there are ways in which there could be strategic plans to protect art centres and the roads that lead to them and those kind of things. So there are multiple ways in which we could, if we can understand that art centres are important, then there are probably multiple ways in which we can advance their importance without changing their character and identity.
Absolutely. And for me, that manifests most definitely as inherent practice, I think, to communities of culture, because it's rare that we're able to access space in a way that doesn't have to be multifunctional. And so in thinking even about the André Cailloux Center, all of those considerations, that doesn't negate the art that's made here. It's a part of the larger story of the functionality and utility of the space, and understanding that this space has to have a certain sense of utility. I remember when Southern Rep was here, and then they closed, and then the hairdresser across the street, someone was saying, I was outside, and someone said, "Oh, Southern Rep closed." And they said, "What was that?" And I just thought to myself in that moment, how sad it would be to close and people not have any idea of what the usefulness of the space was, even if it's not the same thing, to say that's where I had my baby shower, or I saw this amazing show, or this is where I go after a storm to charge my phone, or this is what I do this. There has to be utility to the space, and everyone has to be aware of how their access to this, what their access points are. So definitely, I definitely resonate with that, and I think that's something that I think perhaps in a Western context of performing arts center, it's a bit of a leap to understand that, but in other communities of culture, it's how it's always kind of operated. So yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you all for your work and for your time here today and having this conversation with us. And I know that for the past, I think for me, I met you all in 2023, so that was just 2 years ago. It's been a beautiful journey in having conversations with you and thinking through these topics with you. So thank you, Nick, for introducing us. And thank you all for being here. We're going to take, let's give it up. Let's give it up. A round of applause. We're going to take like a maybe 5-10 minute break, and then we're going to get set up for our next conversation. Thank you all. There's food and there's drinks. Okay. All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you so